Welcome to another Budget 2020 program. Today I'm joined by Minister within the Ministry of Public Works, the Honorable Deodat Indar. Minister, it's a pleasure having you on the program.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Okay, now Budget 2020, $330 billion. Before we get into the details of your sector, what are your overall thoughts about this budget?
Well, thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
First of all, let me tell you, this $329.5 billion to be exact, this budget gives back to people. This budget gives back to businesses, it gives back to the poor, it gives back to everyone. That is what this budget is. I came from the private sector. I was the president of the Chamber of Commerce and the vice chairman of the Private Sector Commission. Over the past 5 years, I was in the leadership of the private sector. And in that position where I had on a different hat, I always was in disagreement with the measures that the previous government put in, which is merely to tax everything under the sun. The philosophy that the previous government had was to tax and spend. And that philosophy, what it did is raking huge amount of monies into government coffers. But that money was coming from the pockets of Guyanese. And that in itself reduces the amount of money circulating in the private sector. So if no money circulating in the private sector, people buy less, they eat less, they travel less, they go out less. And if they do that, businesses can't survive because people just don't have the money to spend. This budget also rectifies a whole lot of wrongs that were put in place by the previous government with relation to taxation on the rice industry. Rice is something everybody have on a daily basis. I mean, they tax the fertilizer, the herbicide, and the pesticide. Mining is a difficult area. Mining is a hard business. Equipment that were used for mining were taxed. Farming is a difficult business. People toil all day farming. They tax the equipment that they use for land preparation, harvesting, and so on. This budget removes all of that. Electricity, something that every single Guyanese depends on. Every child needs it now to be on a computer or something to do Zoom to learn. Every person needed it in the night to study. Every person needed to run their business. They put VAT on that. That is just wrong. This budget removes that. Water, which is a life-given thing, was taxed. This budget removes that. This budget has so much measures inside of relief that I believe this budget give in 1 year, actually 3 months, from October to December, what 5 years of the APNU budget did not give. It gave back a lot, right? Close to $20 billion in reliefs, in tax reliefs and so on, right? So that means that $20 billion will remain in the private sector and households to spend here. People can save a little for a rainy day. You're gonna save. When you go to the shop, you go to the construction, you go do a little construction, you gotta pay VAT on those. Everything was taxed on the previous administration. And I believe that this budget remedies a massive amount of those. Let's take fees. Fees to operate. Any licensing fees, any business you carry on, there's a licensing fee. If you have any form of a business, you need a license to operate. All of the licensing fee went up. All of the land rentals went up. So when you were making a small little thing and your cost now goes up, it means you're making a little less, and less as you go down the road. This budget fixed all of those issues with land fee, rental fees, all of the operating license that you have to get to go about doing your business, especially at a small and a micro level. This budget really reaches to the small man and the micro businesses and the man who is self-employed, right? So I believe that this budget here is a strong signal that the PPP government is willing to work with private sector, work with businesses in terms of getting them back into the mode of generating wealth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. Now, moments ago, you made your maiden presentation in the National Assembly. And in one of your key points, you highlighted that the Guyana Power and Light was left with some $8.7 billion in losses. It suffered. Could you expound on that and the challenges that you're now faced with in getting
Okay,
things back?
2016, 17, 16, 17, 18, and 19, right? So 15 they took over. So over the last 3 years, 2019 is not out as yet. They haven't finished the accounts as yet. Over the last 3 years, the information that came to me from GPL, when you add it up, they made $8.7 billion in operating losses, right? But what is dangerous here is that the government then were not paying GPL their bills. So much so that government agencies, government ministries and agencies owes GPL $13.1 billion as of this morning. So how can the company independent operate when when a massive part of their billings is not paid? GWI is the biggest culprit. They owe GPL about $6.7 billion alone. So GPL need that cash to operate because that is the organization that anything goes wrong with it, you feed it in your household. It's either some load shedding, it's either some blackout, some engine we can't repair. Something always wrong with that institution. We have to fix that. We can't continue like that, right? So we have to fix it. But the previous government, again, I just said it, they did not invest anything in terms of developing base load capacity to help with what we call a spinning reserve for GPL. So that if an engine goes out or two goes out, you have a reserve to kick in. They didn't do anything. When they were on caretaker status, they loaned GPL to buy 5 generating sets that you can't benefit from now. Till April 2020, thereafter, you're going to benefit from that. So that is why we had to put in the expressions of interest to get immediate private sector people who have extra power to bring it into the grid. And that is what we are doing right now as an immediate term measure until we deal with the matter of the 5 generating sets that equivalent to 6.5 megawatts. That will be sometime after April 2021.
Thank you very much, Minister. Now, from the budgetary allocation to the Ministry of Public Works, what are some of the priority areas? I know that we're almost through to 2020.
Let me just say this to you. The budget for the Ministry of Public Works, 70% of the money done spent out already. Under the Ministry of Public Infrastructure by the previous government, 70% of that money done spent already, 22 billion done spent. In rollover projects, 66 different roads that they built prior to elections, bridges, sea defense rollover projects, a whole set of rollover projects. So we have a small piece of that to spend between now and December. Are we going to spend it out? Are we going to spend it on roads, some bridges that we identified, key critical areas that we found when we did a conditional survey quickly, a rapid assessment of what are the areas that we need to put some kind of resources in, and that is what that money is going to go in. It go in the roads, bridges, sea defense. As you can see, sea defense. Look what we have in Region 5. We have some of that at Den Amstel. We have some at Sans Souci, some over in Zealandia. We have some in Essequibo, some in 66 Barbies. So we have these spots in the country that is weak, and we have to fix them, right? So we have to do street lights too. We have the hinterland airstrips that we got to fix some of them, hinterland roads too. So that money, the capital spend, will be going to those things. Critical infrastructure for now.
Thank you. And $150 million was spent on CJIA expansion. Of course, that's another area with some challenges that you mentioned just previous moments ago. What are some of the plans to ensure that we get some amount of value for money?
Well, I don't know if we can get value for money prior. That is previous government to answer. I just laid my argument in Parliament where I believe that entire project was mismanaged. And there's evidence to that. Anyone could go and see the evidence. It's sitting there waiting for people to see. There are 914 defects items that the engineer agreed with the consulting engineer. Ministry of Public Works have an engineer on the project, and then the contract have an engineering consultancy. They both agree that 914 items of defects is in that place, and we want it fixed. We told the contractor, China Harbor, to fix it, because that is tax. That is your money, my money, and everybody in this room money. We paying for that. That's taxpayers' money, and we want value for it. So I just laid the argument in Parliament that based on the revised scope of works by the previous government, if the contractor can just do that and finish that off. Because as you know, that project is 800 days and counting in liquidated damages. 800 days and counting. That project's supposed to finish long now, since 2018 year end. It will finish yet. And when you go in the place and you check it, there's a whole lot of issues there. Everywhere, it just wasn't run right. It didn't run right.
And what are some other plans for the aviation sector going forward?
Well, the aviation sector, there must be a master plan for the sector. But I believe in my vision that this sector Guyana can be seeing more traffic. It can be what we call a hub for South America, this part of South America, not the central side or, through Suriname, Brazil, and the other countries. Guyana can be that. We have the potential to be that. Right? Right now they're using Panama. Trinidad is also a small hub. I see Barbados want to hold themselves to be a hub. But Guyana is central in terms of its geographic location to be the stop to move people further down into South America. Right? So when it comes to aviation, all of the airports in the hinterland also needs to be refitted properly. Some of them are not in good state. We got to fix some of them. Right? Well, we have plans right now in this budget to fix some of them already, right? At Ringbang, some other airports, we have to do some work on some of them, right? But the aviation sector, I believe, have great promise to Guyana because you have an oil and gas sector. Based on the oil and gas sector, you have a lot of people coming in here from all over the world, and you have to cater for that, right?
And also, as we're on aviation, in this budget, one of the measures is the removal of VAT on hinterland travel.
Yeah.
How would that translate
Well,
to the
so
ordinary?
removal of VAT on hinterland travel for us would help the Amerindian community. Everybody that operated in the interior will benefit. It's less money you pay. If you remove VAT, it's less money you pay. So that is a benefit to the Amerindian people and the riverine community. But in addition to that, there's a lot of items that were on the aviation sector that used to pay VAT on as business operators in the sector will now benefit too, right? Because remember, the aviation sector too it suffered tremendously in the COVID-19 pandemic. So they need all the help they can get. All of the ground handlers in the country had to shut down. The airport is not working. The taxi drivers, them who normally transport passengers, they didn't get anything because there's nobody traveling anymore. So there's an entire squeeze and slowing down of the system to a grinding halt when it comes to the aviation sector. So that sector needs all the help it can get. All of the help it can get. As you can see, we can't operate in Guyana in isolation. Look what is happening globally with the aviation sector. Globally with the aviation sector, a lot of airlines have shut down. Look, Liat, they went bankrupt because this pandemic is something that you've never seen before in our lifetime. The last time something like this was in 1918, the Spanish influenza. Now you have one 102 years after. So we have to manage in this pandemic environment, and it requires innovative thinking, innovative ways of doing the business, government's business.
Okay, Minister Indar, before we wrap up the program, some closing remarks on Budget 2020.
Well, this budget, I'm very proud of the amount of measures that are in the budget. The measures that are in the budget remedies the mischief of the previous 5 years that was created in the economy. This budget have the philosophy, the overall philosophy of putting money back in people's hands in the private sector so that money can circulate. They have the philosophy of putting people back to work. It also have the philosophy of working and building the private sector. They have the philosophy of making sure that you don't tax more than you're earning. Previously, the rate of the tax that were collected far outstripped the rise in your pay. If you were getting 5% increase in your pay, the budget tax revenue was going up by 9%. So where's the extra 4 coming from? You got to go deep into your pocket. That's what it simply means. If you're taxing at a rate that outstrips the growth, personal growth, and personal income rise, what you're doing is pauperizing your country. So that is why a lot of people felt the hammer of the tax regime, very abrasive tax regime. So I'm very happy that our government decided to change a lot of those, right, and give back to the country, go back to people. People are starving. This pandemic has caused a lot of people to shut their doors based on the regimen from the Ministry of Public Health under the previous government and now Ministry of Health under us. So the regimen of business that were closed had to furlough a lot of workers. Those workers have not come back yet into the fold. You need them to come back into the employment fold. Because if they don't come back into the employment fold, again, you will have more poor people in the country, more people on the breadline, and you don't want that. You want to bring people out of poverty. You want to bring them into the middle class. Right? So I believe this budget is a step in that direction.
Thank you very much, Minister Indar. It was a pleasure having you on the program. Hope to see you again before the budget wraps up debates.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And thank you very much, viewers and listeners.